Practicing certain drawing movements and marks can really help fast track your drawing coordination so that you can control your pencil to get the results that you want. I'm Emily, and this is another series of drawing exercises for beginners. As with any new exercises, don't overdo it and make sure you're keeping your hand and your arm relaxed to avoid any strain. Before we start, please consider subscribing to my channel. With your support, I can continue to bring you free drawing tutorials like this one. To warm up, start by sketching some ovals or ellipses across the page. Keep the hand loose and moving in a circular motion. Once you've got halfway across the page, change the direction of your ovals. Note how I'm drawing over top of the shape 3 or 4 times to get the rhythm. Keeping that same rhythm, draw the ovals, but this time extend the ovals downwards. So you're drawing what looks a little bit like a spring. It's important to keep the hand moving freely. Note how my hand isn't stuck to the page. And then switch directions. The hand is moving constantly in that circular motion, but it's also moving downwards at the same time. This time we're going to sketch our ellipses and move downwards, but we're also going to decrease the size of the oval that we're drawing until it comes to a point. And here's our tornado. Starting large and reducing the size, keeping that nice smooth action of the hand down the page. And then change direction. This time we're going to start from the bottom, so starting with a really tight small circle and then gradually increasing the size of the oval or the circle as we go upwards. You may find it a little bit more difficult when you start from the bottom to control the size of the ovals as you move upwards. And then change direction, and this will likely feel pretty awkward, but it's a great exercise for your brain and for your coordination. For this exercise, we're going to start off by drawing some C shapes with a nice loose flick at the end. And this is the start of our wave. So next line, once we get to the top of the C shape, we're going to curve back down and up again. Can you do this starting at the opposite side of the page? So it's like drawing a C shape from the bottom, coming up and then back down and repeating. Try to keep a nice fluid motion with your hand moving across the page. Keep the fingers relaxed. And can you change the direction of the wave? This is like drawing a backwards C shape. And then the most difficult one, in my opinion, working from right to left and drawing that backwards C shape. To draw ripples, we're going to start by drawing a wobbly line, starting at the left, to the right, to the left, to the right, to the left, to the right. And every time you change direction, you're going to have a nice soft curve there. You can add a little bit of a flick on the end. Keep the hand moving smoothly. And changing direction, starting from the right, moving to the left, right, left, right, left, right, left. Now we're going to play with this line a little bit, working continuously so the hand is always moving, start drawing ripples, and once you've gone down, you can start coming back up, and then down. You can make longer ripples or shorter ripples, and you can weave those ripples in and out of each other. Once you've moved all the way across the page, repeat the same exercise, and you can weave this one in to fit with the one that you've just done. Keep changing the size of those ripples. You make the decision when to make them bigger or smaller, and think about how they fit in with each other. Imagine you're drawing gentle ripples on the water, or perhaps a reflection of light on the surface of the water. For this one, we're going to start by moving across our page and creating a curved mark using a flicking motion. Start at the bottom and flick the pencil up and slightly to the side to create a gentle curve with a fine point on the end. And then try reversing the direction. You can clearly see that that direction is a weak point for me. Next, use that flicking mark to create a pattern. Start in one place, flick up and over, and you can vary the direction of the flick each time. Layer this up to create something that looks a little bit like some reeds or some grasses that are blowing in the wind. Make sure to keep the fingers relaxed and the hand moving freely. And of course, once we get halfway across the page, we're going to try doing the same action in the opposite direction. You may need to change the position of your hand to do this. If this feels awkward, don't worry, just do the best you can and remember to keep your hand relaxed. We've drawn reeds blowing to the left and reeds blowing to the right, and now we're going to draw a bunch of reeds or grasses that are stationary, and they're going to be moving upwards and also slightly to either side. You can change the length of each mark, maybe towards the bottom of the bunch of reeds they are a little bit shorter, and towards the center of the bunch they are longer. You could also change the weight of your line. Is it a light line or a dark line? Try to get into a natural rhythm of using that flicking motion. If you're working through these continuously, now would be a good time to take a break and just stretch out those fingers, give them a little bit of a shake, particularly if you haven't been doing a lot of drawing or if you haven't done these movements before. This exercise is a really good one for practicing how to control the pressure of your shading marks. Use your pencil a little bit more on its side, and moving from left to right, start with very short shading marks moving up and down, and as you go along the page, increase the size of those shading marks, and then you're going to alternate, decrease, increase, decrease, increase. Repeat the same exercise, moving from right to left this time. You're trying to keep the pressure even, and you're trying to keep the hand moving. So it shouldn't be going light and dark, it should just be going bigger and smaller. Try this again using whichever direction you prefer. Using that same up and down shading mark, create a wavy line. You could draw this using one single continuous line, but we're drawing it using this shading mark. You're keeping the length of each movement the same, but you're also moving up and down and across the page. Now we're going to draw some imaginary bark on a tree trunk. Draw 2 parallel lines for the trunk and then use that shading motion to move around the trunk, up and down, side to side, and what you're trying to create is these white shapes in between that shading line that you're creating. Keep going until you've filled up the whole trunk with your shading pattern and those white spaces in between. If you think of those white spaces as pieces of bark that are catching the light, we can add a bit of a shadow to one of the sides or maybe underneath each white shape. Keep using that same loose shading movement. Let's try another one. Draw the parallel lines for the tree trunk, and this time think about the shapes of white that you create as being longer rather than taller. Keep the hand moving, keep the fingers relaxed, and try not to think too much about it. We want this to be a nice, natural kind of a mark. And then add some darker shading marks underneath each one of those white shapes that you've created. You could also add a bit of shading to one side of the trunk. So imagine the light is coming from the left-hand side, the right side of the trunk will be a little bit darker. Let's try one more. This one's going to be a little bit more like a birch tree or perhaps a palm tree. And to do that, we're going to create long white marks in between our shading pattern. A little bit like stripes, but again, try to keep it natural and not too controlled. Under each of those long white marks, add some scratchy marks to create a shadow. There's no need to use too much pressure with the pencil in the hand, and pencil should be moving loosely across the page. For this final exercise, we're going to draw some little trees, and this might be useful for if you're wanting to sketch outdoors or come up with some imaginary landscape scenes. Create a pattern by drawing marks like these. It's a little bit like the letter U and it's slanting to the left. And then repeat, but slant those shapes to the right. Work quickly and using a flicking motion. Repeat again, this time changing the direction of those shapes. Sometimes they point upwards, sometimes they lean to the left, and sometimes they lean to the right. And once again, but this time you can also vary the size of the shapes that you use. Don't think too much about this, but just let your pencil move across the page, drawing bigger or smaller U shapes and changing the direction. The idea is to create marks that look natural and not controlled. So some of the shapes may be incomplete, some may be darker, some may be lighter. Now let's draw some trees. Lightly draw the outline of 3 overlapping shapes. We can think of these as bunches of leaves. Go ahead and fill in the bottom of each one of those shapes with our leaf pattern. And then we can add a trunk with 3 branches. Add an imaginary light source. If the light is coming from the right hand side, then underneath and to the left of each shape will be a darker shadow. Add some shading and add in some of that pattern that we used for creating bark on the trunk. Let's do this again using just 2 bunches. One is going to be big and one is going to be small, and each one is going to have a branch attached to it leading to the trunk of the tree. Add the leaf pattern. Remember to change the size of the leaves and the direction that they move in, and then you can add some shading. The top of the trees will be light, and we don't actually need to have any leaves there because our mind makes up what's missing. Draw one more. This time I've created one large shape for the bulk of the leaves, and then I'm adding some branches underneath and just a short trunk this time. I can create some shapes within the larger shape and then add my leaf pattern. I'm starting at the bottom because that's where it's darkest. And then as I move up towards the top where the most light is hitting, I'm sort of fading out that pattern. For the tree to feel like it has 3 dimensions, it needs to have a light area and a dark area. At the top of the tree will be the lightest, and then at the bottom of the leaves will be the darkest, and there'll be some shadows on the trunk as well. Go ahead and draw as many trees as you want, and then you can also add some shadows using that nice loose shading mark that we used for the bark. The shadows will be at the base of the tree and moving in the opposite direction from the light source. Now, someone asked a very good question recently, and that is, what do I do with all of the pages of warm-up exercises? Personally, I use an old sketchbook, but you could just use any old piece of paper. And if I wanted to do the exercises regularly, I just work over top of the last exercises, front of the page, back of the page, and several times over top. What the page looks like isn't as important as the movements that you're making with your pencil. And then when you've got a stack of paper or a full sketchbook, you can just recycle the pages.